This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you, who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the thumb was engineered, the foot was deviled, and the Peter was black, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder what a basket chair is? Or why Watson's medicine of choice is always brandy? Or what a coal scuttle is and why cigars would be there?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Bert Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 451, John H. Watson Never Went to China. Hello there, and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast, where we get into the... Hello there, and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast, where we get into the details of the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
Yes, you are, and I'm Bert Wolder.
Bert, on the slow boat to China, are you?
Yes, exactly right. Yeah.
Is there a quick boat to China?
There's a quick boat, but you have to be using QuickBooks to get on the quick boat.
Swift boat.
And
yes.
My problem is that I always, file my own tax returns, usually in a folder called tax return. But so I can't get on the quick boat to China.
Okay.
But I do have some China. So that's close. That's close.
I knew we'd get there eventually. Yes, this is the slow boat to tangents here on Trifles. We are at that point of the month where we give you a discussion of a piece of Sherlockian scholarship, maybe one that is not readily accessible by most people, so it may not be as widely known. Or maybe it's one from a long time ago that we've forgotten about. At any rate, we are looking at a piece from 1949 by J. Finley Christ. Not sure where it appeared originally. I don't think there's a note about that here, but it did appear in Baker Street Miscellanea, Volume 1, or Number 1, I should say, from April 1975. It's an interesting take on some inspiration where Conan Doyle may have gotten the name from for this character and his associations in Edinburgh and beyond. And J. Finley Christ looked at that with fresh eyes in 1949. So stay tuned for this discussion about Watson having never gone to China. Meanwhile, just a reminder, you can support us on Patreon or Substack, whichever works for you, for as little as $1 a month. Your contribution helps us to do the research, get the materials, pay for all of the associated costs with running a podcast like this. They are numerous. You wouldn't think they are, but they actually are. And gives us the ability to put on, well, what we think is a quality show. That's with a capital K. And bringing you these wonderful discussions every week about the minutiae related to Sherlock Holmes. And if you could, while you're out and about, maybe leave us a review or a rating on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Leave us a comment anywhere you find the show where we have commenting ability turned on. Could be on our website at SherlockHolmesPodcast.com, or could be on Patreon or Substack. We love hearing from our listeners. We love getting ideas from you. If you want to write in and give us an idea for a topic that we may not have covered in these 451 episodes yet, You can email us at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com. And if we use your idea on the show, we will give you a gift. So how's that for an incentive? Okay, J. Finley Christ, an old irregular, one of the great Baker Street irregulars from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, wrote quite a bit. But when you pointed this out to me, Bert, I can't remember ever having seen John H. Watson Never Went to China in any other publication.
No, myself as well. And that was one of the reasons that I wanted to put it on the table today. It's in its way, it's a little remarkable thing, and I don't think it has been printed since this appeared for the first time. Well, let's put it this way: the first time that I know of and you know of, in Baker Street Miscellanea in number 1 back in 1974, which is, folks, if you've got your abacus out, that's half a century ago plus a year. This was riding the crest of a resurgence of interest in Sherlock Holmes that followed the publication and success of The 7% Solution, Nick Meyer's novel. And what happened here is Bill Goodrich, John Naminsky, and Don Pollock, who were joint editors of something called they were the proprietors of the Sciolist Press. And they created this publication, which ran for several years, and it's wonderful. And it's a wonderful resource for people like us. And they described sort of in their first issue what they wanted to achieve with the publication: open yet another channel for speculation and creative expression for themselves and others, and to make a few friends along the way. I love that. I think that's great. And they note in that first issue, with the kind permission of Mrs. Maud Christ, we publish a little-known essay by Professor J. Finley Christ, which appeared shortly following the publication of John Dickson Carr's biography of Arthur Conan Doyle. The paper is informative and offers an example of the careful research which characterized all of Dr. Christ's efforts. And it really is interesting. And that's one of the well, you be the judge, but it's also indicative, I think, of the disputation that went on in this particular time. So you've got to sort of think about it in that context. John Dickson Carr's what's happened is Conan Doyle dies in 1930. There's a biography written by Hesketh Pearson about Conan Doyle, which his family disliked intensely. They gave Dickson Carr, whom we've spoken about before, recently, access to information, materials, resources about Conan Doyle. Dickson Carr's biography comes out, and here we have Finley Christ taking issue with one of John Dickson Carr's statements in his biography of Conan Doyle, and so that's the background here.
Yeah, that's a good lead-in, and he starts us on. He said that it's a small thread which is not essential to the integrity of the fabric of Mr. Carr's book, but it has to do with the origin of Dr. John H. Watson, a character almost as famous as Sherlock Holmes. Page 46 of the book is concerned with the origin of the patronymic of the beloved John H. Watson. It says there was a real name he might use. It suggested the burly and the commonplace, a friend of Doyle's at Southsea, also a leading member of the Portsmouth Literary and Scientific Society. Was a young doctor named Watson, James Watson. Surely Watson wouldn't mind the use of his surname if the first were changed to John. Down it went as John H. Watson. Well, Christ says that as evidence of the validity of this conclusion, this James Watson was the president of this society in 1890, and he presided at a farewell dinner in honor of Conan Doyle, December of that year. But a considerable time before Mr. Carr's book was available, Christ, had considered this James Watson as a possible model for John H. But although the British Medical Directory for 1889 showed that Dr. James was a resident of Southsea in that year, I had given up on him because the directory provides the following data. What are those data, Bert?
Well, it's a number of things, but among them, the fact that this James Watson took his MD at Edinburgh University in 1863 when Conan Doyle was 4 years old. He published an article a year later in the Edinburgh Medical Journal. He was editor of another medical journal. He reported to New Chang, China, where he was aligned with the British Consular Service. And he was listed in 1889 as late physician of the British Consulate and Imperial Customs at New Chang. Well, Christ reminds us that Study in Scarlet was written in March and April 1886. And Conan Doyle had chosen his characters' names before he wrote the story. So it doesn't seem probable or possible that there could be this sort of connection between the name of this particular Watson and John H. Watson. And so, says Christ, when I read Dickson Carr's book, I brought out these resources again, these directories. Well, this James Watson was not a young friend of Doyle in the late 80s, because James had been in practice since Conan Doyle was about 4 years old. I wasn't so sure how long he'd been in England by 1890, if he'd been there at all. Certainly he probably wasn't there when Study in Scarlet was written. And so, there you are. And then he goes on to another couple of things. He actually sent an inquiry to the Foreign Office and got a letter back from the Foreign Office, which recounted the dates in Dr. James Watson's movements. There are no records of the exact dates on which he left China and arrived in England, but he was residing in Southsea in March of 1886. It would therefore appear, in view of travel conditions in those days, that he would have left China shortly after his resignation. Well.
Yeah.
So,
and they tell us too that he was born in 1839. So hardly the quote-unquote young doctor that Dickson Carr makes him out to be in Southsea. And Chris says that the last sentence, that is that it would appear in view of travel conditions in those days that he would have left China shortly after his resignation. So he says the last sentence there justifies an inference that James did not leave before the date of his resignation, and also that he couldn't have been at Southsea very long before March 1886. So other things that support this latter inference, if he left Edinburgh in 1865 and reached New Chang on May 2nd, the passage of time must have involved some 60 to 90 days. See, there's that slow boat to China that we were talking about. So, and he just referenced the mail schedule of getting mail from Peking to the mainland, and that mail boats were faster than passenger boats, and he just worked out the timing based on that comparison.
Well, Christ sort of wraps it up and then takes us down another interesting path. His wrap-up is, look, it's pretty nearly certain that Dr. James Watson was not a model for and did not give his name to John H. Watson. For all of those reasons, he wasn't young. It's highly improbable that James could have been a friend of Conan Doyle for any significant period of time before the name Watson was assigned to the character. But, says Christ, I offer another suggestion. Now, it's mere surmise, but it holds some promise of interest. In a book by Logan Turner, called Sir William Turner, some interested facts are presented. There was a Patrick Heron Watson, assistant surgeon to the Royal Infirmary of the University of Edinburgh in the early 1860s. He was promoted to surgeon in 1863. He chose for his assistant one Edwards. Dr. Joseph Bell was an unsuccessful applicant for the same appointment. And so I searched further for the possibilities of some Bell-Watson-Doyle connection. In 1865, when this assistant Edwards died prematurely, Joseph Bell became Heron Watson's assistant. And in 1871, when Watson was again promoted, Bell himself became head surgeon and at once established himself as a favorite clinical teacher. So here's Joe Bell with his assistant, Heron Watson. And he was called Heron. And Christ says, Heron, as his familiars called him, was a stormy petrel of medical education, just as John H. became a stormy petrel of crime, as Holmes tells us in the Naval Treaty. Among the other things, Heron was among the very first to insist upon equal rights and status for women in medical education, in clinical work and all. And his colleagues disliked him heartily and bitterly for it because it drained away their students and cut into their revenues. And says Chris, the boys apparently liked to have the girls in the clinics with them, and so they went where the girls were.
Oh. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that play on words of Heron and Stormy Petrel. Anyway, while the pressure was on, Christ writes, I put together my data. Heron Watson had passed up Joseph Bell in 1863. True, he surrendered in 1865, and Bell followed Watson up the ladder in 1871, after which Bell became a popular teacher. Heron's rejection of Bell is the first round in what may have been the basis for a student prejudice against the older man. And such prejudice may have descended through a couple of generations of students. Heron Watson was still active, and Bell was still a favorite when Doyle was in Edinburgh. And as Doyle recalled Bell and wrote as of him as the inspiration for Holmes, some of the old prejudice may have adhered to him, so that both Watson and the Heron and the H from Heron may have descended for these reasons. He says there's another train of thought which may produce the same result in a manner more pleasant to take. I maybe doubted that Heron Watson was the source of the surname in the saga because Heron Watson was not a commonplace man. But let us recall that John H. Watson was not commonplace either, no matter what Conan Doyle started out to make him. In any case, Heron may well have been the original in the H in our John's name. If Sherlock Holmes was designed after Joseph Bell, why may we not suppose that Watson was named after Patrick Heron, not in spite, but as a distinct honor? Heron would have been an unusual original for a distinctive character, and so I think it was our own man, John Heron Watson, and that he had never been in China in all of his life.
It's a lovely little echo of the 1940s and this sort of disputation and intense research. Can you imagine Bell, imagine Christ with his medical directories. I mean, in those days, in the 40s, he's really at the library here digging into this. But then in his footnotes, Christ has a number of footnotes here, quoting Conan Doyle and his reference to selecting what he thought would be a drab, quiet name for this unostentatious narrator, and pointing out that this reference here to John and James, Christ says, when Doyle wrote The Man with the Twisted Lip, James could have met all the qualifications ascribed by Carr, except that of youth, so that Doyle, even though he no longer resided at Southsea, might well have had James temporarily in mind then, as occasion from Mrs. Watson's error in referring to her man as James. So, there you are. It's a nice little circle.
It really is. And, to think that this was going on in 1949, and would have been, oh gosh, maybe about 20 or so years after the Dorothy Sayers piece on Hamish Watson. The world was still ripe with Sherlockian speculation, as it still is today. So I think there's always room for more discovery and more theories. And when it comes to that, I'll bet Dr. John H. Watson has never been in, I don't know, the Congo or Norway, or, I mean, pick a country. You can probably pick quite a few of them. And we have the basis for many future Sherlockian papers as a result.
Oh. And all of that is just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
But China?
The fish, tattooed immediately above his right wrist. I have made a small study of tattoo marks, Mr. Wilson, and have even contributed to the literature of the subject. That trick of staining the fish scales a delicate pink is quite peculiar to China. When, in addition, I see a Chinese coin hanging from his watch chain, the matter becomes even more simple.